Okay, we're speaking over here about the confusion. Remember, we pointed out that we're learning all about this concept of BECHIRA, free will, of seeing things clearly, and if a person's vision and his mind is clear, so then when he gets himself into a situation where he has to make a choice, he should be able to make the right choice. The problem is, as we began pointing out last time, there is a veil of confusion that is covering the eyes of every single person. There is a distortion of reality so that we don't actually know anymore what is really right and what is really wrong. As we pointed out before, the voice that's in our head of telling us to do the wrong thing makes it sound like I want to do the wrong thing, which is not true. That's the Yetzer Hara, that's the evil inclination. And the voice in my head that's telling me, no, you don't want to do that. You want to do the right thing. When it's calling you, that's really me, that's my neshama, that's my soul, my Yetzer Tov, my good inclination. We hear it in the second person, which means we hear things backwards. So there's a great distortion that is going on inside of man. Now he says like this, very interesting what he writes. It's a verse in the Torah. The Torah says that the Nachash, the serpent, came to trick Chava into eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the verse says the following. V'teira Isha, the woman saw. Remember, he's offering you this fruit. He said, no, I can't eat from the fruit. Hashem told me not to. He said, no, you could. You have nothing to worry about. V'teira Isha, the woman looks at the fruit. Ki toiva eitz l'mayich. She said, oh, it's good to eat. V'chisava hi la'einayim. It was like a taiva, like a desire for her eyes. V'nechman and pleasureful. Ha'etz lahaskel v'tikach mipiryoy. She took from the fruit and she ate. And then she gave to her husband as well. So what does it say over here? She saw that the fruit of the tree was good to eat. So Rabbi Tatz asks, how could you see how fruit tastes? She saw that it's good to eat. How does she know that it's good to eat? Must be that she decided it has a good flavor, a good taste. How can you see flavor? You can't see flavor. She never had this fruit before, did she? No. She never ate from the fruit of the tree. So how does she know by looking at the tree that the fruit is going to be tasty and is going to be good and she should eat it? So he says, what does it mean over here? Distortion of vision began the downward slide. A vision that saw clearly became a vision that suggests. She saw clearly before. She knows this tree off limits, which means it's not good for you to eat from this tree. That means that before she sins, she's supposed to look at the tree and she's supposed to say, even though the colors might be nice, and even though the tree might look robust and very full, and the leaves are nice and green, and the serpent over here is telling me how delicious everything's going to be, but I know in my vision, the clarity that I have, Hashem told me not to eat from this. It's no good. So why are her eyes telling her, oh, the tree looks very good. The fruit looks very tasty. You should eat from it. So he says, a vision that saw clearly becomes a vision that suggests. It's now suggesting something that wasn't there before. Fantasy replaced reality. Reality is, it's no good. That's the reality. Hashem said, hands off. It's off limits. You cannot have it. And to eat it, for sure not. But the fantasy that she imagines in her mind, in her mind's eye, that she sees this fruit, because the Nachash, the serpent, was telling her all these things, suddenly that becomes her reality. So it's really fantasy, but her fantasy becomes a reality, as he's going to explain. Now, a clear vision would see Hashem everywhere. If you had really clear vision, everywhere that we look, we would see Hashem. However, the eyes do not cooperate, and we see things, or we don't see things that we are supposed to see. And he quotes from the parsha a couple of weeks ago that Hagar had a son whose name was Yishmael, and she was sent out of the house by Sarah and Avraham, and she's going through the hot desert, and the boy is dehydrating and running a fever, and he's drinking from the flask of water, and the next thing he knows, the flask is empty. And Hagar is distraught. She takes the boy, she puts him underneath the tree. She can't bear to see her son in so much pain. And she's in a state of great confusion. How am I going to save the life of my child? And the boy starts crying out to Hashem, save me. I'm dying, save me. And suddenly Hashem tells Hagar, don't worry, Hagar. Open your eyes and you will see in front of you. And she opens her eyes and she looks, and there's a well of water that's in front of her. Now, was the well of water always there? She just was blind to the well of water? Or did Hashem create a wellspring of water that never existed before? What exactly is happening in the story? Her eyes are opened and therefore she sees something that she never saw before? Or her eyes are open to something that wasn't there before, and Hashem made a miracle for her, and He created a wellspring, like a real oasis, a wellspring of water that did not exist. What exactly is happening over here in this story? So he points out, and this is really what the commentators say. The verse doesn't say that Hashem created the well. It says that He opened her eyes to see. That means that the problem is not the absence of a higher reality. It is the human inability to see. The water was always there. The solution to her problem was always right there in front of her. Your son is dying of thirst and of a fever. He needs to be hydrated. So you need water. The water is actually right there. She was so nervous. She was so worried. She was in so much anguish. She was so wrapped up in her problems, she couldn't see what's right in front of her nose. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu calmed her down. And He said, Hagar, open your eyes and take a look what's in front of you. And lo and behold, there's a well of water right there. And she fills up the flask, she gives it to her son Yishmael, and he survives and he lives until this very day. Hezbollah, Hamas, you name it. That's who he is. Yes?
So, when Isaac went up to the mountain with, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Abraham took Isaac.
Yeah, when Abraham took Isaac up to the mountain, did he see the ram before?
No.
No. So was it always there?
It was always there. It was always there, but it wasn't his objective. Meaning, again, I can't say he didn't see it.
Yeah.
Maybe he got up there. Maybe he got up there and he saw the ram, but it wasn't what he was dealing with. He was dealing with taking his son to the altar and slaughtering him on the altar. It's only afterwards when Hashem says stop, and he looks behind him and he sees there's a ram whose horns are caught in the brush, then he tells him, take that instead of your son. So what's the point over here? The point is that the clarity and the reality is always there. We just, in our convoluted vision, again, in Hagar's case, it was her anxiety, it was her nervousness, it was her panic, it was her fear that her son is going to die. She's wrapped up in her thoughts, she doesn't see her son. But if your mind would be clear, then you would see what's right there in front of you, the water that's going to end up saving your son's life. It's right there. So he says, a very interesting Gemara. The Gemara says like this: at the point of death, if a person is sick, it's the time that he's going to die. So he sees the Malach HaMavis, the angel of death, is standing over him. And it's full of eyes. The angel of death, the Malach HaMavis, is filled with many, many eyes. He has a sword which is drawn, and it has a drop of poison on the tip of the sword. So the guy's lying on his deathbed, and he looks up, and he suddenly sees angel of death in front of him, and the angel of death is covered with eyes. And he has a sword, and the sword on the tip of the sword is poison. As the person sees this, he gasps, and the poison is then cast into his mouth. So his mouth is closed. This poison cannot get in there. He's in shock. He sees this angel of death with all these eyes all over its body, whatever exactly that means. And now he goes, and the angel of death sticks his sword tip into his mouth, and the poison goes into his mouth. And apparently that is the beginning of the end. That's how he's going to die. So Rav Tatz asks over here, what is the Gemara telling us? The vision of death that a person is going to have is the angel of death with many eyes and a sword that's going to get dipped into poison, go into his mouth, and that's it. It's the end. The end has come. Now, he says the eyes saw falsely and brought a world of fantasy into being, a world of non-existence. The eyes that are on the angel of death are a symbol of your eyes in this world. Your eyes in this world, which could have seen clarity for 120 years, but instead decided to look all around and see a world of fantasy, and they made the world of non-existence, because fantasy means it doesn't really exist. It took now it's hard to know what's real and what's not real anymore, because everything with all the social media and all the TikTok and all the people and everything that goes on, you don't even know anymore what's reality. And now you have AI to make things even worse. You don't even know, did he really say that? Did he not say that? Did that really happen? Did it not really happen? You see videos are being posted all day long. You don't even know, is it true or is it not true? Is it live or is it Memorex? You don't know anymore what's going on in this world. So he says that the eyes unfortunately distorted the image of reality in this world. You don't need hundreds of eyes to see the plain reality. There's enough with the two eyes that Hashem has given us. You could just peer through all of the schmutz and all of the confusion, and you're able to see what's reality. Man creates worlds of unreality, but that's the problem of man. He creates worlds in his head that are not reality, and then chooses to live in the many dimensions of his imagination. He's living in imagination. He prefers visions of fantasy to cold fact. And there was some TV show, I can remember it was many years ago, and it was that this was a kid who grew up like in front of the TV all of his life, and in his head was all just imagination. And he lived his whole life, and he made other shows. No, what was the name of this show? It's from probably like 35 years ago. What was it called?
Jim Carrey plays in a bubble. He lives in a bubble and everything.
No, it wasn't a movie. It was a TV series. Anyway, I don't remember. It must be going 35 years ago or something. The opening scene is this kid sitting in front of the TV. He's like an infant, and he's just taking it all in. So he grew up in the world of fantasy. So his mind was just one big ball of fantasy. And that was his profession, was making new movies and new TV and stuff like that. No? Remember this? I remember this. Okay. I don't know, maybe I'm having a fantasy right now. I don't know. Okay. But anyway, so that's what he's saying. And that is that we end up creating and we end up living in the dimensions of imagination, and we prefer visions of fantasy to the cold facts. It's much more comfortable to live in fantasy. Reality sometimes is painful. Reality is brutal. Reality might mean that I have to decide to work on myself or live a certain way or do a certain thing. That's reality. Fantasy is great. So those worlds of unreality must die for man to be reconstructed in a form that is aligned with reality. Now, the only way that I'm going to get to reality in my life is if I begin to break down the worlds of fantasy that I've been running after or living in that bubble of not reality. Once I get rid of the fantasy and the imagination and all of that, so then I can begin to come back to the world of reality, of fiction is real, non-fiction. The world of non-fiction, to be able to see what the truth is right in front of me. Hagar was living in a world of frantic anxiety because her son was dying, and so therefore she was not able to see what's right in front of her. Hashem said, calm down. When you get out of your head and you get out of your worries and you get out of your negative thoughts, calm down. You'll see the reality that's in front of you. There's water right there in front of you. When a person is living in a world of fantasy, so he doesn't even know what's right and what's wrong anymore. What do I really want? What don't I want? Which direction should I go in? Which direction should I not go in? He doesn't know anymore. Everything is fantasy. So once you begin to peel away, that's what he's saying, you begin to peel away those layers that are there, So then you can get into that world of reality, then you can see. He's saying over here, part of the struggle that we have in our world of BECHIRA, free will, and making the right choices, is that we don't even know anymore what is fantasy and what is reality. How much are we inside of our world of dimyonis, of illusion and fantasy, and how much are we living in the world of reality? Think about you go to a movie, and after the movie, you don't stop talking about the movie. You're going through the characters, you're going through the storyline, you're going through the message, the theme, and you're having a conversation, you're sitting around at a table. Now you went with your wife, right? Think about this. You and your wife want to have a date. So what do? You go into a movie theater, and you sit next to each other like this, and you watch a screen for 2 hours. Sitting in the dark, you're not talking to each other, you're watching a screen of other people. Now the woman on the screen might be more beautiful than your wife, and she's thinking this guy is more handsome than you are. So you're sitting there, you're watching the movie. Now you walk out of the movie theater, now you look at each other maybe for the first time in 2 hours. Wow, that was amazing, that was great. Now you sit down, and now you go out to dinner, spending a lot of money to go out to dinner. And you spend the whole night talking about the movie. And then you go home. Now home is reality. The movie is fantasy. The characters are fantasy. The woman that's more beautiful than your wife is fantasy. The one that's more handsome than you are, that's all fantasy. And you spent for the last 5 hours together trying to make your marriage better in a world of fantasy. Then you go home and you close the door and you're back in the world of reality. Reality is your wife's not that pretty. Reality is you got bills that you have to pay. Reality is that you'd like to redo the house and remodel a little bit. Reality is that this one called you and gave you a headache. That's reality. So which is better? It's much easier to live in the world of fantasy because it's so much more comfortable, so much more exciting. There's so much more geschmack. We call it enthusiasm. That's over there. So it says Rav Tatz over here, you have to know which world are you living in. Are you living in the world of fantasy or are you living in the world of reality? As long as you're in the world of fantasy, it's going to be very hard to make the right decision because you're weighing out reality versus fantasy, but you're not sure which is reality, which is fantasy. So therefore, all the eyes that are there on the angel of death at the end, it's Hashem's way of saying, you let your eyes wander into all these different worlds in your lifetime, and you didn't take advantage of the 2 eyes that Hashem gave you just to see what's right there in front of you. So we'll see more. It gets more fascinating as we go along to understand what's going on inside of our mind's eye, how we look at the world around us.
Why can't you allow yourself to be in the world of fantasy for a little while? And then you know that you have to come back to reality.
Right. So again, I'm just giving you the example. I'm not knocking. I'm giving an example. The problem is, and this is really where he's going with this, is that the more that a person occupies themselves with the world of fantasy, the more difficult it is to see the world of reality. So there's going to, again, we can't live in a black and white, narrow world all the time. You have to be able to breathe, and you have to have freedom, and you have to have entertainment, you have to have all these things. But you just have to know that the more that the FDA just discovered now that they think that social media is detrimental to people's mental health. They just discovered it. It's amazing. They just discovered that if a person lives in fantasy land every single day of their life for as many hours as they're on, they can't live reality. They just discovered that right now. So that's what he's saying. If you live in fantasy, it's hard to get back into reality. So we'll have to see how we're going to do that. God willing. We can keep them.
Can I take this with me?
You sure?
I won't be here for the next 2 weeks.